Hello and welcome to the May. This is the May book, right? This is the May Kids Club for Comix Experience, and our book is Real Friends. Did we get it in the camera? It's really small.
Mine.
Yeah, hi, and we're here with Shannon Hale, who's on our video screen here, and LeUyen Pham, who's here live and in person, and we're going to talk about the book and all that. And did you guys read the book? Did you like it?
Yes.
Were you excited? Yeah?
Yes.
Good stuff? All right. Excellent. Excellent. So let's start. Well, let's start with you, Shannon, because you're the furthest. And this is probably weird because I'm turning away from you from your point of view. Maybe I should do this, but then I can't see. I don't know. Anyway, so you.
I feel like I'm Max Headroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so.
I don't think they get that reference, but okay.
Well, I got it. So you know. And when we put this up online, other people will get it, so it'll work. So you are primarily a prose author. You've even won a Newbery Award, which makes you a big deal prose author. But this is not your first comic. Your first comic was, as I understand, was Rapunzel's Revenge.
Yep.
That's
and Calamity Jack.
Yes, and Calamity. Yeah, very good. See, we have someone in the audience who's read both of them. That's really awesome. And what's interesting is that you did that. The artist on that was Nathan Hale, who we had last time. And I hadn't actually made the connection until I read it on the Wikipedia this morning. You guys aren't related, right? It's just Hale is completely coincidental. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just coincidental.
Yeah. So I guess the question. So I guess there's two questions there. So the first question is what attracts you to comics as opposed to prose?
I don't like to use one or the other of any 3D author, and I like to do as many different styles and genres and everything as I possibly can. But specifically what I love about comics and graphic novels and sequential art is it uses a different part of my brain. It challenges me differently as a reader. And I found there was a misconception about it by people who didn't read comics, that it's easy reading and that it's less literature somehow because of the pictures. But in fact, it's actually just using a different part of the brain, and it is extremely challenging kind of reading. But it is extremely accessible kind of reading, especially for certain readers. And so when my first book came out, and the second and third, which were all, really thick fantasy novels, I met so many readers who just didn't feel capable of tackling that kind of a book. And I would meet these kids, and moms would say, this child loves your books, but this child is not really a reader. And that just broke my heart, because I know every kid is a reader if they have the right book. And a lot of kids are visual learners. And I wished I had a book I could give them. And at that time, children's publishers weren't making graphic novels for kids. And DC and Marvel really weren't doing a lot of all ages comics. And so my husband, who's a lifelong comics reader, we decided to collaborate and write something that we felt like these certain readers would thrive with. And what I discovered in the process is it's not just certain readers that can love and do well with comics, but they're really great for every reader. So for visual learners, the art is a through line, a hook for them to read the text, to understand the text. But there are a lot of learners who are not visual learners, and comics help them to learn to read visually. The text helps them make sense of the visuals, and it's creating two separate memory paths in their brain, both the visual and the textual. So it's a really exciting medium for any reader. And I love the challenge of it. I will just say also that I think that writing a graphic novel is harder than writing a prose novel. And I think maybe LeUyen might agree that illustrating a graphic novel is about as challenging illustration job as illustrator has.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. No. I wanna ask you about that because your background is illustration rather than picture books, right? Exactly. So that's using a completely different set of muscles, right? Than talk about that a little while, and maybe what attracts you to comics as well.
I mean, you guys are still young, so do you remember any of your picture books from childhood? Like, maybe
Yeah.
you know some of them. The thing about picture books that's different is that in a picture book, you're trying to keep the attention of really, really young kids, right? So it may be a long story, but you have like one image on each page to get a kid to look at the book. And so you try to make it a really enticing image, and you're just stealing one idea from each page of writing. So it's like funneling all of your energies into a single image, and then you have to do that 32 times and continue that attention span throughout the book. But it's very concise, and in a way, it's a parallel storytelling as opposed to a complementary storytelling, because you actually have the writing, but the idea behind a picture book is that you can look at it without having to read it, and you still understand what the story is about. So it's a completely different challenge, but it's one that I feel completely independent on. Like, I don't need the author's permission on a lot of ways, because I have everything the author wants to say, and this is the extra layer that I'm adding. But for a graphic novel, it's like dancing with someone. It's a tandem job. Like, you can't go in this one space if the author hasn't gone in that space as well. And if you want to take that into that space, you've got to get the author on board about it. So there's a lot of choreography that needs to go on between those two things. That, and you don't get a single image to do it. You have 20 little panels to communicate one idea, or even half of an idea, or you've got 50 panels to communicate one idea. And it becomes more about acting, and it becomes more about being able to be very concise with the way you read body language and facial expressions, and it's so much more than the entire composition. It now concentrates on the focus of a particular characters throughout. So it's, Shannon and I have talked about this, but it's very much like, it's like making a movie. So suddenly Shannon is the writer and the director, and then I'm the actor. And the set designer, and I design all the visuals, but I can't do anything without her say so, without her saying that's the direction we gotta go. And it makes it so much more complicated. It makes it emotionally draining, because you have to go through it with those characters in a way that you don't do that with picture books. And picture books, essentially the idea is you want to create this lovely world, for me anyway. My idea was to create a lovely world that kids felt safe in. And graphic novels is not necessarily a safe space. It's actually a space where you open up a lot of vulnerabilities, particularly in this story. And it's not something that I'm used to, and it's taxing. It's really, really taxing.
Yeah, no, I see that. It sounds like you guys worked very, very collaboratively on this, because a lot of times in comics, the writer will just write the script, hand it off to the artist, and they're kind of done. Sort of Marvel style, the writer will write a plot and then go back and dialogue it, but it's usually not a give and take. But it sounds like, from what you guys are talking, that you were going back and forth with this a bit. Is that right, Shannon?
That is right. But I think, for one thing, one difference is that when you're writing a novel, we're just not on the same timeline that a comic is. I mean, they don't get an opportunity to go back and forth, because they've got to get that next issue out. And so we have a lot more flexibility that way. But also, it's just such a bigger story. I mean, when it's not a 20-page story, you've got so much more meat that you're trying to deal with, and so many more questions. It's a project of several years, usually, a graphic novel, not just a one. You can do it every month, you know. But with a graphic novel, it's really important that the script is really solid and pretty much final before the artist gets it, because you do not want to be wasting the artist's time and changing stuff afterwards. So really, the collaboration mostly just came in as LeUyen had pencils, and then we got to look at that. And I'm not looking at it so much as in terms of what I don't think her art got, because her art got everything, and I think she was brilliant. It's just sometimes, once it's not until you see the visuals that you realize which parts of the story are being told or being communicated, which are not. And so what do I have to change in the language to make sure that I'm communicating what I need to? And quite often, for my part of the collaboration, after the script was done, was simply to look at her brilliant artwork and realize what text can I now erase. That her picture is telling that part, and it doesn't need my words at this part, and I can delete them.
And you on the collaboration?
I actually felt like I collaborated a lot more with Shannon than she probably does with me, but I think it's because she probably saw it more, you must have seen it more completely in your head than I did, and I'm coming in I'm sort of trying to climb into her brain space to see what it is that she's seeing, but I'm also trying to make sure that my initial reaction to the book makes it in as well. So it's a tough process for me because I want to be honest to the material and honest to what Shannon wants, but I need to contribute my part, or else I'm just drawing whatever. I'm just a drawing monkey, and I don't think it works that way. So in my mind, it was a lot more collaborative because I felt like I needed to make sure that Shannon was okay with a lot of the directions that I was taking. And Shannon, like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried writing a graphic novel, but she like wrote out panel by panel what she'd want, and for me it was great. I stuck to exactly what she had, and it was in doing that I think when Shannon's talking about like when it doesn't work visually, you finally understand it when you see it. It was going through those panels and drawing it the way she had it, and then saying, hey, we could tell the same thing 3 panels less, 5 panels more, not necessarily following those visuals, but achieving the same means to an end. And I think that's where I found it really interesting, because I'm not a writer the way Shannon is, but I love being able to analyze the way Shannon tells story and applying that visually, and it really helps me now as I go forward in appreciating how story is supposed to work and how to accelerate a moment or decelerate a moment, or the moments, like if you were to graph out this book in terms of highs and lows and excitement, like I could see that she has a really specific pattern, and if I kept the visuals with the pattern, it kept you compelled in the book. So it's not a straightforward telling, which I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's just a memoir, you just wrote what you had. She's very precise in what it is that she's trying to accomplish. I don't know if you even knew that you were doing it, I'm sure you do. But charting it out, it's like realizing that I knew that I could keep the visuals going with the pace of the story, and it's what motivates the reader to keep going.
Yeah. It's interesting because I find, and the kids have heard me say this probably too many times, but I find that the most important part of the comics is not the comics themselves, it's not the panels, it's the gutters, it's the space between. It's the silence, it's the place where the reader fills in. And so I guess I would ask you, Shannon, because prose is very much about authorial voice, sort of telling a story, but comics is a collaboration, not just with your artist collaborator, but also with the audience in a way. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a different kind of collaboration than prose, but I will say that I think prose is also collaboration. One thing I've learned with prose, so I've written about 20 novels that are not illustrated, and the reader reactions vary intensely depending on each reader. And I realized early on that as a writer writing prose, I only do 50% of the work. And the reader comes in and does the other 50%. They're bringing their own visuals to it, their own life experience. They're seeing in it the parts that are most important to them that other readers miss. And in other readers, the story is really about this because that's what's most important to them. And then the book changes depending on when they read it and what time of life and what the context is. And so prose really does vary reader to reader, and readers do collaborate quite a bit with the author on it. But the difference with a graphic novel is the reader does have more control. Even though they're getting the visuals, they're not bringing their own visuals to it, they have a control of time. So when you're reading, you read just word after word after word after word. With a graphic novel, the pictures invite you to read at a different kind of pace, to linger, to imagine what's happening between the spaces, for example. It really is using a completely different side of your brain. And you may have, as I have, met adults who had never grew up reading comics and hadn't been exposed to graphic novels, and they try to come at a graphic novel or comic as an adult, and they cannot make sense. it's language. They have not created the mental capacity and have the ability to imagine what happens between the panels. So it really is asking a lot of the reader, and using a lot of their brain power in that way, which is such an exciting kind of format.
Did it take you a while to figure out the differences that you needed to do in the script, in terms of that give and take? Did that question make any sense?
Yes. Well, so I did many revisions for sure. And like LeUyen was saying, it's not a matter just because it's memoir. It's not a matter of, okay, just write down what happened, and you're not really making any choices besides just saying what happened, because a lot of stuff happens in life, And this is like 220 pages out of 6-year period, and you're picking and choosing very carefully what to show, what not to show, what to tell, what needs to be filled in, what doesn't. So memoir is tricky that way, but yeah, you do. The reason why I write it panel by panel, as LeUyen was saying, is because I need to try. It's a visual medium, and with the prose, I'm trying not to visualize. I'm trying to let the words lead. With a graphic novel, I'm very much trying to visualize, and not visualize a movie. That's where I think a lot of people try to write comics or graphic novels and don't succeed. Where they fail is they're imagining a movie in their brain, and it's not a movie. There is no action. There is no sound. It's a different kind of storytelling where you have to convey information in a series of static images. There's nothing else comparable, unless there's some sort of, visual artist that tells stories in series of thousands of Polaroid pictures or something. That would be the most comparable. There's nothing else like it. And so you have to turn the movie off in your brain, but you have to try to imagine what would this panel, what could it communicate, a feeling, an idea, and the next one I do after it, is there enough information between the two that the reader can make sense of the flow? And yeah, that's why I'm saying it's so hard. It really is. To get right, it is a very tricky business. And for myself, I just had to read a lot of graphic novels and comics, and not just read them for fun, but try to analyze what the creators did and how they did it. I mean, that's your school. That's your university, is reading the great stuff that came before.
Yeah. I'll want to go back to that. I want to ask you a couple questions about that, but let me go to you. And so you have the script in front of you. You're reading it for the first time. What's your process to break that down? Because we've talked to many different artists here, and some like thumbnail it. Some. So what's your process like?
Well, what's funny about the script is I actually got it in its infancy, in its early forms. Shannon had sent it to me before I was even considered an artist on the project. So I've kind of known it through its many formations. But I'm a really fast artist. Like, I'm very, very quick. And if I'm going to say that that's my strength, I'm so fast that I'm able to overcome a lot of those issues that I think a lot of artists have about breaking in and thumbnailing to get straight to the meat of it. So I think my thumbnailing on this was less than a month I spent on, and it was more finished drawings than thumbnails. But I get into it very quickly, and there's something in speed that doesn't allow you to dwell on, I think, a lot of things that might bog other people down. So I quickly get into it, and I quickly lay stuff out, and I'm more about approaching the key moments than I am about the overall. So the key moments get addressed first, and within the key moments, I'll work everything out before, and I'll work everything out afterwards. But I'm not going to say it's an easy process. It's a more natural process. Let's put it that way. But it's a lot more taxing and a lot more difficult because it requires a different side of my brain than composition normally does. Composition is how can you construct a story within an image, and this is very much about timing, about laying this out. And because Shannon's already timed everything out and it's so well paced, it's she's a great person to do this with, especially to go quickly, because 90% of the brain work has already been done for me. So to quickly jump into the sketches and to nearly go into finals, because besides speed, I think that the other thing I can do well is convey emotion. And so much of this book is told through emotion. It's told through what her face looks like. And it's funny because what you were talking about earlier about the difference between this and a prose novel, it's like, I see a graphic novel more like a Rorschach test. Like, a kid can read it and they'll see it in a very different way than another kid will see it, because they'll read the body language differently than another kid would do it. Like, my son read this book in its early stages, and his response to it was so much more sympathetic to the bully, and he felt horrible for it. And then another girl read it, that's a friend of mine, and she was totally against the bullying, couldn't stand it, and was so happy. And it was like they identified with certain facial characteristics more than the characters themselves. And that I find really interesting and great, because unlike a prose novel, I think a prose novel will tell you this is exactly what the character is thinking, this is exactly what she was feeling, this was exactly what was happening. There's like an omnipresence there that controls every facet of it. But with a graphic novel, the writing is just so judicious, and it's like crippling you in a way. It's like stripping you of a superpower of being able to describe something, and can you still communicate that story without all of the excess words? And that's where it's like the economy of words matching the image. That liaison is really difficult to achieve, but it's the part that I think is the most fun in doing a graphic novel.
Sure. So the thumbnails, the layouts, that stage, how long did it take you to do the book, would you say?
I'm very fast. I think it took me about 2 months to do them.
Cool. Yeah, that is really fast.
To do, I mean, there was research and there were sketches,
Sure.
early sort of character designs, and I'm a huge thinker. I linger on a project for a long, long time before I start it. But it's like by the time I start, I know exactly what it's supposed to look like. And I want to change it. I do like.
But tell them how many hours a day.
That's true. Once I start, it's like I'm up at 6 in the morning, and then I'm working till 2, and I just don't sleep, and I don't see my family, and I don't have weekends, and it's a solid chunk of time. But I do so many projects in a year, so that working part is something I'm really used to. And truth be told, because it's drawing, it's like handwriting to me.
Sure.
So it's fast. I think it's a much more natural medium. Like I'm surprised I haven't done more graphic novels, but at the same time, it's so hard to do. And I'm not joking when I say like there were parts in this book where the emotional roller coaster that the character is going through, I identified so much with the story. And I mean, you don't have to project because it's your story, but I had to project myself onto it a lot of times. And projecting made it. It was like journal writing to me. That's basically what it is. My illustrations were journal writing. So technically it was a lot easier to do. But yeah, I did it very quickly. And in a way, it kind of saved me psychologically to be able to do it quickly, because I think if I dwelled on it for a year or 2 years of illustrating, I would have gotten very sad. I think I would have gotten too attached to the material, and I would have struggled too much with what the character is going through in the book, because it's difficult, the things that she has to go through.
No, very much so. I want to talk a little more about craft, but I want to bounce it over to the kids to see if any of you guys have a question, because I know listening to us babble about this stuff is sometimes it's. Do you have a question? Yeah, here.
No, I don't think I.
You don't? Okay. Huh? No, it's okay.
Nope.
No?
No.
You always have questions. No, not this time? No, all right.
It all seemed clear. Every question that I had before has already been covered.
Okay, all right. I'll are you bringing something over me? No, you're not.
No.
Okay, so then I will. Let's keep talking about craft then. So you laid the book out in 2 months. Let's say it's probably 3-4 pages a day, something like that.
No, sorry, I laid the book out in about a month, and then I inked it in about a month.
Oh wow!
That's from start to finish, yeah.
Wow!
Yeah.
Wow!
I'm fast.
Wow, you're really fast.
Yeah.
You're crazy fast.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay, because I was going to ask you the question about composition at that point. I mean, so there's the layout, which is getting the pacing, right?
Yeah.
There's the figuring out how many panels there need to be to convey the emotional through line of what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
to communicate the idea. But then there's the actual composition of the, okay, so you know how much time and space it needs to take and much rhythm, but then you have to go in and actually draw it in the composition.
Shannon did 90% of the work, I'm telling you.
Okay.
She had the timing and the pace, like, it was so set up. And in the areas that I varied from what she had, they were just simple visual cues that just couldn't be communicated.
Okay.
So I would say that it was because the script was as tight as it was that I was able to go through as quickly as I was.
Uh-huh.
I've done other graphic novels, and the truth is the more people who get into the pot, that's one of them, I did with my husband and our friend Jordan, the more people that get in the pot, the slower the process gets, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's arguing about how things should work. But I think that I think this story in particular was a bit special because I was so attached to the subject matter. I know Shannon pretty well, and because I felt such an attachment to it, and like I said, it was so much like journal writing, I don't think some of the normal hoops that I might have encountered, I encountered in this book. Like, it felt like a flow to me, and in my mind there were no other directions that I could take some of these spots.
Right.
So it's I'm going to say it was a bit of an anomaly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to say, I've done like 60, 65 of these interviews. I've never heard of someone doing 200 pages in 2 months. I've never heard of that.
It was like really
That's
funny.
insane. That's really fast.
It's her superpower.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
She's so talented. But I mean, we say she's talented, but she's also put in decades of work and practice to get to earn this ability. She's so fantastic. I really think that, like, we're talking about how the graphic novel is much more of a collaboration between creators than any other type, and what we would compare it to movies, but of course you're talking about how many people are involved in the movie. In this collaboration, there really was a third partner who we should mention, and that's Connie Sue, our editor.
Yeah.
So, and that's unusual as well, that it was just basically one editor. You didn't really work with
No.
a separate art director, did you? I mean, it was basically, so it was just the three of us. It was, I did wrote the script and I revised it with Connie, and then went did the illustrations, and Connie went over those meticulously, right?
Yeah.
Like, every single panel. And then the three of us would be on emails and discussions if there were any questions of like, or, when would hit a point when she's like, I'm not sure this is communicating, and brainstorm like what we would change it to. So having it just be the three of us and having it all three of us be on the same page and really just getting the story, I think, made it possible to not only do the book quickly, but to have it come out just exactly the way we hoped.
Does Connie, was that her name?
Connie Sue.
Does she have a background in comics at all? Do you know, or?
She doesn't really, does she?
Oh, we lost your sound there for a sec. Shannon.
He does also acquire, this book was...
I was getting a hand signal. Am I?
Yeah, we lost most of that. Start the answer again if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
Oh, I can't hear you.
So,
She can't hear us.
Oh, okay.
technology.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, we lost most of that answer. Yeah, we both got cut off. Yeah. Try again.
Oh, okay. So anyway, Connie is an editor at Macmillan, and she acquires her first second, which is an amazing graphic novel imprint, as well as other imprints. So I went to her specifically because I'd worked with her before, and I knew she was brilliant, and I knew she worked with First Second, and I know they're brilliant. So I knew that that combination would make her the perfect person for this. I honestly, LeUyen was my dream illustrator, and we worked together on other books. We do a series of illustrated chapter books called The Princess in Black together. But I knew what a big commitment a graphic novel is, and I knew how busy LeUyen is because everybody wants her because she's so good. I really did not even dare hope that she would be able to do this. But the reason why I knew she was ideal for it was first because she's brilliant, and we're the same age. We grew up in the same era, and since this is a memoir, I really felt like having a woman that grew up in the same era, she would just intuitively get stuff that I would have had to explain to somebody else. And also, what Wynn was saying too is that this book really is about how things feel. There's a lot of stories and anecdotes in it, but my main goal with it is it's not fiction, but it's not historical nonfiction where I'm trying to convey what Boyle's Law is or what happened in the Civil War. What it is trying to say this is how it felt to have friendship troubles and to be 9, 10, 11 years old. And LeUyen is so good with facial expressions and with body postures. At a glance, you can tell how the characters are feeling in every panel. And like she said, one thing that a graphic novel has an advantage over a prose novel, one reason why I wanted to do a graphic novel for this particular story, was the fact that with a graphic novel you can linger. And so, for example, you've got group shots of all these different characters in this group, and it's a memoir, so everything's from the point of view of the main character. Everything is how that main character sees it. But a child who is empathizing with other people in that group shot can linger over the illustrations and see, this is how this person's feeling, I can tell because of how her shoulders are. And look at this person's face, this is how she's feeling. Even though the story's not about her, I know exactly how she's feeling. And that makes for a really powerful and intimate personal experience reading this book for somebody who, in a graphic novel format, as opposed to a prose.
Yeah, no, I agree. When you're doing so many different characters here, is it difficult for you to sort of keep the distinct elements of each character in mind through? I mean, this is a long book to illustrate, even though you only did it in 2 months.
I don't want that getting around right away. My publisher's gonna be like, holy crap, you only spent 2. No.
That means you can do 6 books a year.
Exactly. Like, Connie, please don't watch this. No. You know what's funny is I think that's something that I also do very naturally is I inhabit characters. So I knew who each of these characters were, and Shannon had like descriptions of some of these background characters, and they're not background characters, but they just sort of peripherally in the image. And in my mind, like I asked her questions about them, she would send me photographs, and I just immediately projected who I thought that they were. So I knew that they each had sort of background stories, and in that way I kept it separate in my head. And again, like Shannon said, our childhoods were very similar, so I just equated them with people that I remember from my childhood. So they had distinct personalities in my mind, and whenever I illustrated them, it was just simply a matter of like, well, what would Julie have felt in this moment? What would Yvette have said, like, or what would she have done? How would she have held her hands? And it's keeping those characters distinct and different. That's just that part is just fun to do because you know that you're getting a different layer in the book that maybe isn't there in the story, but it provides like a meat to the story basically. What's actually challenging, I'd have to say though, is making them age over 5 years because I have a whole cast of. It's not just like her 6 friends at school, but it's also her sisters and then her younger brother and her parents, and they each have to age over 5 years, and they have to be subtle enough that you can tell. And Shannon's was easy because she had all these photos she gave me, but all the other kids, it was like, okay, you've got to have one thing about them that stays the same so that kids will recognize them, but they have to, they've got to age, and it can't just be that they keep getting taller, you know? It's silly. Their heads are smaller when they're little, so you shrink down the size of their heads, you elongate their bodies. Some girls grow taller than others, and you find all these ways to get them going, and that was a lot more difficult to do. That one was something where I had character lineups of all the characters at different sizes out, and I just had to make sure that visually they looked exactly the same. But in my head, I knew exactly who everybody was, and I had my background story for them, and that part was enough for me to juggle.
And were you getting any editorial feedback on any of those aspects of it, or again were they just leaving you to your own brilliance?
You guys are making me seem like really Shannon. Oh, whatever. No. Wait, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, so what were you getting editorial feedback on? The sizes, the heights, those parts of it, sort of the mechanical parts of it.
I don't think anyone commented on any of that. I think I tried my best to make sure everything was pretty consistent, and mostly I was concerned that for Shannon it wouldn't relate to what she thought she saw in her childhood. And there was talk for a while where I kept saying, I'm going to come visit you in Utah, and I want to go walk around the neighborhoods that you were in, and I really wanted to feel, I wanted to go to your childhood home. And then I realized, like, wait, I can't do that because then it becomes me trying to record her life instead of me interpreting her life. So instead I just went on Google Maps and walked around the neighborhoods. And I really did expect that Shannon was going to come back with like a slew of like, that's not what it looked like, that's something silly. But whether or not they look like the characters that she remembered, she never commented on that. So I actually don't know whether or not, like other than you, I don't know whether or not the characters that I designed were at all familiar to like visually what you had anticipated, or whether you were fine with it not exactly looking exactly like them.
To you, Shannon.
For me, it wasn't important that everybody looked like what they looked like, or that the house looks the same, or the school looks the same, because for me, what was important was how it felt. But that being said, it was eerie how much everybody looked like how I remember them. That was like you crawled into my brain and wrote my memories, because it freaked me out a little bit. I was hoping it actually would look a little less like everybody, so that I could have a little, more arm's length from it, because it's a memoir and it's so personal. And I thought, well, maybe they all look different, then I can feel a little more distance from it, and I won't feel so vulnerable about people reading this about my childhood. But that's out the window, because obviously everything looks exactly right.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because, there's a lot of people do autobiography, biography, memoir, but it's really, really, really rare to have a writer write a memoir that someone else is illustrating. The only other one that I can think of is probably John Lewis's March. Everything else, though, it's always I'm drawing what happened to me as a child. And is there a comment to be made on that? I don't know that I have a fully formed question there, but it seems pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. It's, on my part, I felt like I was being very invasive on Shannon's life to a weird extent. And you're absolutely right. Like, every memoir that I know is illustrated by the person who wrote it. And there's an intimacy there that I don't know that can be achieved in any other way than a single person doing both jobs. My hope in this case is that I represented Shannon as well as I could. But there's a strength to be had in allowing someone else to interpret your life, I think, that the other memoirs might possibly be lacking. And it's that there's a separate perspective that is parallel to what's going on in the main story, but that I think one thing I like to do a lot was I like to kind of question where Shannon was standing and what it was she was trying to do. And in a way, like the conversations that we had was her reflecting on those moments and deciding, is that what I wanted to communicate? That's not exactly what I was trying to say. And it's almost like splitting your personality doing this. You've got two people who are trying to achieve the same ends. But it's, like I said, I think it's an anomaly. I don't think most people can do this. I think it would be very, very difficult if it was a writer I didn't know. And I tried to do the exact same thing with the person I didn't know and I didn't feel as close to, or that I didn't feel like the sense of trust existed between us. And like I said, I have done other graphic novels and I've worked really closely with the authors in both cases. But there reached some fork in the road always where the author would say, this is my vision, this is what I want, do what I want. And I never got that with Shannon. And I don't know that it's something that I could replicate with somebody else. I don't want to be known as the memoir illustrator for sure. I don't want someone else coming up.
Honestly, it's kind of a miracle that it worked out. I mean, I think I went into it a little naive. I'd written these other two graphic novels, but I hadn't written a memoir. And to go into it and
Asking somebody illustrate my most intimate memories and my most vulnerable self, and to hand that over to somebody, I kind of, looking back, can't believe that I did that I tried to do that I had the audacity to think that we could pull it off. And now, having gone through this process with Connie and LeUyen, I am 100% certain that I wouldn't do it with anybody else. Like, the fact that it was serendipity, that it just worked out perfectly, that LeUyen and I, we talk about how we kind of shared a brain through the whole process. And I don't think it could work out the same way with somebody else. she just understood the emotion, she understood what was important, she communicated and told the story, and she was so tender and perceptive with the characters. One worry I really had going into it, as I was writing it before we had an illustrator, was I'm showing the really difficult and bad things that some characters, real people, did. Some friends of mine and a sister. And I didn't want them portrayed harshly, because some of the things they did were really harsh. But I also have a great deal of compassion for these people, and they're real people. And I was very apprehensive about that part of it. But once I saw LeUyen's pencils, that any worry just went away, because she's a compassionate person, and she dealt with them honestly and fairly, and didn't demonize anyone. And knowing her, I wouldn't have thought she would. But that is the risk when you're dealing with real people. But now, having done this with LeUyen, there's no way I would ever be able to do it with somebody else.
That's tricky. Having done this, I don't think I would take another memoir from someone else.
Yeah.
Honestly, that I didn't know. I think it's too scary. The responsibility is too immense, and you need to do it just right. It's tough.
Yeah, no, and as I say, the only other example I can think of is John Lewis's March, and that's a matter of historical record in a lot of ways, and so there's an emotional distance there that I think, I haven't spoken to them about that book, but I imagine there's a level of emotional distance about that in doing it.
Would imagine,
that you don't have here. Were there places that she exceeded what you expected, or drew it in a way that transcended your own memory of the event? Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm sure there are. I'm trying to think of examples. Well, a lot of the story is another reason why I wanted to do graphic novel medium rather than tell a prose novel or prose memoir, is because there's a lot of imagination sequences. Both as a child, I escaped into daydreaming as a defense mechanism, and also I was an early storyteller, so I was making up stories both to write into books and as in games with friends. And I just thought the visual of that, having a visual of it, would definitely add humor and fun. And so those, I think, were always my favorite, because I saw what happened in my childhood. I already knew what that looked like. But to get to see someone illustrate your daydreams, my gosh, that's like, that was the coolest. And now, every single one of those fantasy sequences, I was like, can I write a whole book about this? And have LeUyen illustrate it? Can we do the Runaway Orphan book? Can we do the Secret Spy book, and the Charlie's Angels, and the Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders book? Those were really fun. But I think the tender moments too, one scene that I was particularly worried about when I was writing it was I included my childhood image of Jesus in, I think, 3 or 4 panels. Jesus makes an appearance in my imagination panels. I was very devout, I prayed a lot, and I was, as a child, trying to hold on to, maybe friends don't like me, but Jesus does, which is, something I hoped was true, but at the same time, it wasn't enough, It wasn't enough to make everything okay. And I tried to show that in a couple of panels especially, and I was very nervous because, I'm not sure there's any riskier topic to include in a children's book than religion in general, but specifically Jesus, because it's just such a touchy topic. And I knew if we did it wrong, the people who were Christian could be offended and be like, this seems like it's mocking, and that's not the way I see Jesus. And people who are not Christian could be offended and be like, why are you trying to push Jesus into this story? And it had to be done exactly right, or it could have just been a huge fail. Mm-hmm. But when I saw the way LeUyen illustrated those panels, again, it was just like this relief of that's exactly right. That's exactly how I felt. And it's kind of sweet, and it's kind of sad, and it's kind of funny, and it was just perfect.
Yeah. those were fun. The fantasy sequences. Like, do you guys remember in the book how she's constantly fantasizing and thinking of stories? Like, the truth was, I know that you think I illustrated your stories, but those were my stories. You know, like kids. I think overall their imaginations might be very, very similar. And so those scenes where she's Wonder Woman, like, oh my God, that was totally me. I did Charlie's Angels, I did Wonder Woman, I was X-Men at some point. Wolverine's still my favorite character of all time. Like, I projected myself onto Luke Skywalker. I was never Princess Leia, I was Luke Skywalker, you know? Like, so all of those fantasy scenes were just release, especially because the story is so difficult. And if you look back in childhood, like, you fantasize to release from your own life. It's ways for you to cope. And in this book, it was the exact same thing. Those fantasy scenes were ways to cope with the harsher aspects of the story. So those were just so much fun to do. In fact, my fear of that was that Shannon would write back to me like, no, it's not quite what I imagined. So it was good that we were on line with that. But the Jesus scenes, I found those really interesting because I also saw Jesus as this very benevolent character. Like, he wasn't religious in my mind. There was something about him where it was just like, that's the guy that's going to have my back growing up. But I didn't even know who he was. He would never speak. It wasn't like he was a true presence. And in the scenes in the book where Jesus shows up, that was what it was supposed to be for me. And I think that's what Shannon wanted, was a comforting presence. Like some part of your brain that tells you you're okay. And that's what he was like. An it? No, it's the ego. Super ego.
I don't remember which.
I think he's the super ego.
I think that's right. But
Yeah. Not the it. That would be bad.
Interesting. We're almost out of time. I just want to check with you guys. Any questions of any kind? Nothing about writing, drawing, anything?
What did you guys think about the end of the story? Like, what
I thought it was a good ending to the story where like no one should be alone. I think that really initializes the story, the point of the story. Friendships are hard. Sometimes you'll move on and you won't always have the same friends, but you can keep those friends even if you move along.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Every comment I had has just been stolen.
Well, you know what's funny was like my son was reading the book and he was 8 at the time when we were doing it, and my son figures like since I'm doing the book that I can change things if I want. And there was a part in the end of the book where Shannon like turns away that girl. Do you remember that scene?
Mm-hmm.
Where she turns the tables on sort of the bully. And it's a big story for Shannon. Like, it's a story she's told often to kids. And my son, when he read it, like, his immediate reaction was, that's so mean. She's so mean. Why would she do that? And he wanted me. He really, really wanted me to change it. And I think we were nervous about that. We were really nervous about, like, how are kids going to respond to that? How'd you guys respond to it? Like, what did you think?
I think it was technically fair because how Jenny has been bullying her. I see why Shannon turned her down.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, it's sort of saying, you can't bully me. So if you bully me, I'm going to say no. Because sometimes sometimes people just bully you and you keep on letting them do it. Sometimes you just have to say, stop, stop it,
But here's the funny question is like, when I had to draw Jenny's reaction, and I remember we talked about this, like I changed her reaction, 4 times? The initial reaction I had was her looking really sad. And that made my son cry. Like, she looks so sad. Shannon is like turned and she's become the bully. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's change it. Then I made her looking really angry. But then it seemed like now she's just like this one-sided character. She's just mean and there's nothing redemptive about her. And that was like trying to find that middle ground of between sad and angry, and then honestly like how a kid would react. And I kept thinking, if I was a kid and someone had just turned me down, I would have put on a face like, oh, I don't really care. But something else had to show that I was sad about it. So the fact that you guys aren't, can you even recall what Jenny's face looked like, or were you so deep into Shannon's response? You can't look at it now!
It looks like this.
Yeah. But like, when you read it, did you feel for Shannon or did you feel for Jenny?
I felt for Shannon because it was like a long time ago. I just had this kid who I really didn't like because they really didn't like me. And then they're always really mean. And then yeah, something like this happened. So I think that kind of gave me a bias towards me.
See?
Plus, Jenny, she's really small and
I know.
and she's kind of in the background, so that's why I didn't really think like, gee, that must have hurt.
See, this is good for me to know, because next time I'm confronted with like a challenging position, it's like, okay, you focus on the character that you sympathize with, right? So long as you're sympathizing with the main character, it's easier to get away with certain behaviors from the other. Okay, that's good to know.
It was a tricky moment because I don't remember what her reaction was.
Yeah, but you're not supposed
It
to.
really happened, but I don't remember what she said or what her face looked like. And that happens a lot with memoir because you can't remember. And I don't know if you guys have seen the original Jurassic Park, but in the original Jurassic Park, they find the DNA, extract dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes that have sucked dinosaur blood out of amber.
Yeah.
And when they're trying to reconstruct it, there are pieces missing. And they're not actually sure, like just over time it's degraded, they're not actually sure what was missing in there. So they use frog DNA to make up the what was missing.
Which turned out to
And
be a
then
huge
that dinosaur
mistake.
turned out a little bit wrong because of that. And I felt like with memoir that's what we're kind of doing because I can't remember everything. So I'm reconstructing it and there are missing holes and I put in what I think might go in there, but I might be wrong. And that one scene where do we show the bully's face or do we not show her or what her expression is because I don't remember what it looked like, what would be fair to her, she's a real person even though we changed her name. And so I was very nervous about that part. My kids went had a hard time with that part too. Because I tried to teach them to be kind, and then here I'm showing myself not be kind and not be forgiving with somebody. They wanted me to take the high road no matter what. But I think we ended up showing it because it was true, and because I do think that it's okay ultimately to put boundaries between ourselves and people that hurt us, and I don't think that's a bad thing for a kid to get out of the story.
Yeah. So you have a wall that you have to climb over between what your memory is and what you put on the page, and then it's changed again by how you draw it. Do you think that this ended up being an honest reflection, a idealized reflection? And then my corollary question to that is, did you send the finished book to any of the other girls involved, and what was their reaction to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know. Is it idealized? In some ways it must be. Wynn and I have talked about how now my memories have been illustrated, and therefore the true memory is what we've created. And my memory of what happened is forever going to be changed in my mind because there's a book about it. And memory is tricky. So somebody theorized that when we remember something, what we're remembering is the last time we remembered it. So it's like a game of telephone. You can never go back to what the original memory was because after it happened, you remembered it. And then the next time you remember it, you're remembering that one. And on and on and on. It has to change. So my goal was to try to be, but I think the feelings are true. Even if all the details couldn't possibly be 100% true, I believe that the feelings were true. And so that's what I'm writing, what I kept going back to. Whenever in doubt, how did it feel? And try to create a scene that could evoke that emotion. As far as what people who were in it think about it, I made this little promise as I was writing it that I would not talk about the real people in it except for what happened in the story. It's just my weird way of trying to protect them still. So you don't need to extrapolate from that. There was a negative reaction or a positive reaction, or they know about it at all. But I just decided I just want to protect them, their privacy a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable. So I guess my last question, let's go back to something you talked about at the very beginning. And you talked about sort of going to comic school, of reading a lot of graphic novels, reading a lot of books. I'm assuming that you do something kind of similar.
My husband is French, so we have nothing but graphic novels.
There you are. Cool.
Yeah.
I like that. So do you each maybe want to talk about, just a small handful of comics that really affected you? Whether it's specifically for doing this book or just increasing your knowledge of how comics work in general. And why don't we start with you, Shannon?
Sure. Well, yeah, I love comics. My favorite, my husband and I actually wrote a novel about Squirrel Girl, the Marvel superhero. And she's one of my favorites. And I love Ryan North and Erica Henderson do the Squirrel Girl comics, which we love. And I highly recommend all of their comics. There are a lot of trades out. There's a great graphic novel called Squirrel Girl Beats Up the Marvel Universe, which I really recommend. I love Ms. Marvel. She's such a great character, and I love following her comics. Other graphic novels that I obviously read a lot of memoirs that I could get my hands on. El Defo by C.C. Bell is one of my absolute favorites. I really recommend that one. Raina Telgemeier, Smile and Sisters were books that I also reread, examining how she did what she did, just like with C.C. Bell. Blankets was one that I reread, and I remember specifically when I was reading Blankets during one draft of writing, that I realized how much he did with silence. And I think that's something an illustrator probably thinks about more than a writer. My tools are my words, and there's always a tendency with a writer to write too much in a graphic novel. And after rereading Blankets, I went back and just looked at where could I allow the illustrations to do the talking and where could I shut up. And I deleted a lot through that pass, and even more after I saw Wynn's illustrations. And that, I think it's a normal part of the writing process. Sometimes you just overwrite, so you just get down on paper, you know what you're thinking about, and then you figure out, how can I do this the most concisely? Because you will never want to tell a story with more words than you need, whether it's prose or graphic novel. Let's see, other graphic novels that I've loved. Oh gosh, there's so many. I've got a shelf here. I'm like trying to remind myself. Well, anyway, those are the big ones.
Cool. That's a good list. That's a good list of stuff. I like that list quite a bit. And you?
I also just collect graphic novels because they're pretty, like not even for the stories sometimes. Because of course I just want to improve. I love LeUyen Phama's work. Rico and Julian, like as a pair, they must be like what Shannon and I are like, except that they're related. So, and Julian is just, she's just such a beautiful artist. Like I'm so envious of her line. I loved all of Raina's stuff. I love everything that's currently popular out there. There's a book, I think her name's Emily Mitchell, called Through the Woods. I love that book. It's just very subtle. Have you guys read Through the Woods? It's kind of like a gothic horror. It's really kind of freaky. I think there's like 5 different stories inside.
Might be a little scary for some of these guys.
No, it's not too bad. You guys should go pick it up.
A little.
Maybe a little. All right. And then there's the one that I was just recommending, Nimona, which I love. I just
Nimona's
picked
great
it
book.
up and finished reading that. There's a bunch of French artists that I really like too. There's one, I don't know if you guys have it here, The Arab of the Future. Have you guys gotten
Yes.
that one? By Riyad Sattouf?
Yep.
It's a little bit like the book Persepolis. Have you guys read Persepolis? Oh, it's a great one. It's really. I met Marjane Satrapi like right at the height of when the book came out, before she was popular in the States, but she was in Paris and she took me out to lunch and talked about graphic novels, and she was amazing. Like she sat me down and she was trying to encourage me to write, and she was telling what her story was, and she said like she wrote Persepolis because she had moved to Paris. She wasn't finding a lot of success as an illustrator, and her friends were encouraging her to just write down memories that had nothing to do with one another. And she just wrote down like 2 pages of a memory, 2 pages of a memory, and then realized that there was a line that was going through it, and pieced it together and turned it into Persepolis. But she kept saying it didn't start as a story; it started as my life, and transposed it onto the paper like that. So I love Persepolis for that. There's a book called Three Shadows. Have you seen it?
Absolutely.
Cyril Pedrosa.
Mhm.
It's just the most beautiful, beautiful illustrations ever, and the story makes me cry. You have to have kids to get it, but it'll destroy your heart. Mark Siegel's Sailor Twain. I love that one too. Blankets. Craig's a good friend of mine, so now I see it in a different way. But it's one of those books that made me realize that you could tell such deep stories with so little words, and how masterful if you can control a composition, you can control an emotion on a single page, and that's pretty amazing. When you don't even have to show the face of a person, but just the way lines go across the page, you can still control the emotion. That's amazing. I could go on and on. There's just too many. Of them.
No, that's great. That's a fantastic answer. I like that. And you guys will all read Persepolis before too long, I'm sure.
It's have to.
Almost every high school is now like making it a required book, because it really teaches you a lot about growing up in Iran of all places, and yeah, it's a fascinating book. So I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you for coming out here from Los Angeles, and I want to thank you, Shannon, for coming in and talking to us here. I thought Real Friends was a beautiful book. I thought it was very real, and I'm really glad that you guys got a chance to read this. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I. Yes, let's hear some noise. No, we're not going to hear any noise. They're nodding their heads, so there's some noise. I want to remind you that our next book is 5 Worlds.
Is Mark coming out?
Mark is going to be doing the video call. We're actually having all 5. We have 5 people did this book, and they're all somehow going to be on the video call, which will be so much fun for Jordan over here.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
We'll make it work though somehow. And this book is ready for pickup now. So if you haven't picked up a copy, you can get it right now. We have some temporary tattoos that go with it too, so that's kind of cool. And that's next month's book. I want to thank you two for coming out. I want to thank everybody watching at home. Read more comics. Comics are amazing, and thank you very much. All right, Ralph?
Yeah.
Thank you again, Shannon. Thank you very much.